The first step is edge painting all 4 pieces of leather along the top edge that will form the pockets of the wallet. Once you've painted a layer of paint on each of the pieces, set them aside to dry, making sure that the wet edges aren't touching anything. You want to allow the pieces to dry for about 30 minutes until they're fully dried and hardened. Once the edges that you've painted have fully dried and hardened, we are going to move on to sanding them down and applying additional layers of paint. Once you've finished sanding the pieces down, apply an additional layer of edge paint as we did in the first step, and then set them aside to dry for about 20 or 30 minutes until the paint is fully dry and hardened. Once the pieces are dried and hardened, you can either do an additional round of sanding and painting, or you can move on to the next step. Once your pieces are dried, we're going to move on to sewing them together using a saddle stitch. I also offer a separate video tutorial on my page if you want additional instructions. So we'll begin with matching up the 2 interior pockets, and we'll start with sewing these together, and then we will layer the exterior pockets on top of these and sew the full piece together. So first we're going to take our bundle of thread and measure out a piece of thread that is 4 times the length of the entire sewing area around the body of the card holder, plus some extra, just to make sure that we have plenty of thread. Cut the measured thread from the bundle and then thread a needle onto each end of your cut thread. We're going to begin our stitch on the 2 pieces of leather that make up the interior pocket of the wallet. They have the exact same number of stitching holes on each side. So we're going to take one of our threaded needles and thread it through the very first set of corresponding stitching holes. Then measure out your 2 needles so that there's the same amount of thread on each side. Take one of the threads, loop it over the top of the corner seam, and then thread that needle back through the first set of holes. This is going to seal in your corner seam of the wallet. Pull both of the threaded needles tight to make sure that that top thread is sealing the 2 corners together. Next, take your threaded needle and sew it through the next set of corresponding stitching holes on both pieces. Pull it tight, and then flip the wallet over and take the threaded needle that is coming out of the preceding stitching holes, the very first ones that we sewed through, and thread it through that same set of second corresponding stitching holes. Pull it nice and tight, and then that will have formed your first full saddle stitch. We're going to continue the saddle stitch down the piece until we get to the last 2 open holes. Once you reach these last 2 open holes, overlap the exterior pieces of leather on top of the interior pocket piece by 2 holes. Then continue your saddle stitch around the piece. Once you reach the final 2 holes on the other side of the wallet, you're going to repeat the same process of overlapping the interior and exterior pockets by 2 holes and saddle stitching them together. Once you reach the top of the piece, just as we did on the beginning of the wallet, we're going to loop one of our threads over the top, sealing the corners together and threading it back through the other side. We're going to finish off our sewing by back stitching 3 times. Back stitching is the exact same process as saddle stitching, just moving in the opposite direction and overlapping your previous stitching. This is going to seal in our sewing and keep it from unraveling when you use the wallet. Once you've completed your 3 back stitches, you are going to give the threads one last pull and cut them as closely to the face of the leather as possible. Next, we're going to apply a layer of edge paint to the combined edges that we just sewed together. Set the piece aside to dry for about 20 or 30 minutes or until the paint is dried and hardened. As our final steps, we are going to sand down this combined edge and apply additional layers of edge paint. Because these are multiple layers of leather that have been sewn together, it'll take a couple more rounds of sanding and painting here to get a final smooth edge. I would recommend applying at least 2 coats of edge paint with rounds of sanding in between and a maximum of 5 just to avoid any bulkiness in the paint. Thanks for watching this tutorial, and feel free to let me know in the comments if there are any products you'd like to see designed next.